The intensive care unit of the Veterans Affairs Hospital was a place of managed time, where life was measured not in days or hours, but in the rhythmic electronic beat of a heart monitor. It was a symphony of soft beeps, the gentle hiss and click of a ventilator, and the distant, mournful chime of an unanswered alarm. The air itself was a sterile composite, thick with the chemical sharpness of bleach and antiseptic, layered over the fainter, sadder smells of sickness and slow decay. It was a place of fragile, constructed order, a bulwark against the chaos that waited just beyond the veil of medicine. Anya Volkov moved through this soundscape like a ghost. She was a study in self-effacement, her shoulders habitually curved slightly inward, her gaze often directed at the polished linoleum floor or the charts in her hands. Her uniform was neat, functional, but worn without a hint of pride. It was simply a covering, another layer of invisibility. To the casual observer, she was just another nurse, competent but quiet, perhaps a little timid. She performed her duties with a precision that was almost supernatural, yet she did it so quietly that it drew no attention. Her hands, when cleaning a port or adjusting a line, moved with an economy of motion that bordered on unnerving, each action flowing into the next, without a single wasted twitch. She refilled IV bags, documented vitals, and turned patients with a gentle strength that belied her slender frame. She was a creature of routine, of checklists, of following the established protocols that kept the fragile peace of the ICU intact. This predictability was her shield. It was the wall she built around the part of herself that she had buried 6 years ago, deep in the dust of a country whose name now tasted like ash in her mouth. She had chosen this quiet life, this role of a caregiver in the background, as a form of penance, a way to serve without being seen. Dr. Martin Evans, the head of the critical care department, was the antithesis of quiet. He moved through the ward like a weather system, his voice a booming announcement of his own importance. He was a man built from credentials and confidence, his white coat worn like a suit of armor, his chest puffed out with the self-satisfaction of a man who had never been truly tested. He saw the world as a series of problems that his intellect, and his intellect alone, was uniquely qualified to solve. His authority was a bludgeon, and he wielded it with performative gusto. He strode into the nurse's station, his presence sucking the air out of the room. "Status on bed 4, he demanded, not looking at anyone in particular, his eyes already on a chart he had plucked from its slot. Brenda, a senior nurse with kind eyes and a spine of forged steel, answered him. "Sergeant Peterson remains stable. Vitals are holding steady since the last adjustment to his pressors." Dr. Evans grunted, making a note with a flourish of his expensive pen. His gaze swept the room and landed on Anya, who was meticulously organizing a supply cabinet. "Nurse Volkov," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Still finding new ways to avoid patient interaction?" Anya's hands stilled for a fraction of a second. She did not turn around. "Everything is stocked for the code card, doctor," she replied, her voice soft, level. "Just ensuring we have parity on the CUs." "Parity on the CUs," he repeated, a sneer playing on his lips. "Such technical jargon for stacking boxes. Try to focus on the living, will you? This isn't a warehouse." He laughed, a short, barking sound that expected others to join in. No one did. The silence that followed was heavy, thick, like the room held its breath. Anya finished her task, her movements deliberate, controlled. She turned, her face a mask of professional neutrality. As she reached for a binder, the cuff of her scrap top rode up her forearm, revealing a sliver of dark green and black ink. It was just a glimpse, the edge of a complex design, something that looked like a pair of stylized wings or feet, wrapped in a serpent. Dr. Evans noticed. "What's that? Getting some ink to feel a little tougher, nurse?" He jibed, his smile as sharp as a scalpel. Anya pulled her sleeve down reflexively. The motion was so ingrained, so automatic, that it was a part of her. "Just a personal matter, doctor," she said, her voice remaining impossibly calm. He scoffed, turning his attention back to the charts, having already dismissed her. But Brenda had seen it too. She had seen the flicker in Anya's eyes, not of shame, but of something deeper, harder. A flash of a locked room whose door had just been rattled. It was a look Brenda had seen before. in the eyes of old soldiers who carried wars within them that had never truly ended. She said nothing, but her gaze on Anya softened with a new kind of understanding. The day wore on, a steady rhythm of beeps and hums. The fragile order held, but Anya felt a familiar tension coiling in her gut. Dr. Evans's casual cruelty was nothing new, but the comment about her tattoo had been a stone tossed into a still, deep pond. The ripples were disturbing things she preferred to leave at the bottom. The ink on her skin was not a decoration, it was a memorial. It was the final page of a chapter she had torn from her life, a story of screaming helicopter rotors, the coppery tang of blood in the air, and the impossible weight of a friend's last breath. Here, in the sterile quiet of the ICU, she was just a nurse. That's all she wanted to be. That's all she was allowed to be. Later that afternoon, the inciting incident arrived, not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of a new patient file. Dr. Evans, holding the chart as if it were a distasteful object, approached the nurse's station again. "We have a new admission from the long-term care wing," he announced. "Sergeant Thomas Miller. Multiple comorbidities, post-sepsis syndrome, now presenting with fluctuating consciousness and renal decline. It's a mess. A long, slow slide to the inevitable, most likely." He scanned the faces of the nurses, a flicker of malicious intent in his eyes. He was looking for a place to deposit this difficult, unrewarding case. His gaze landed on Anya. It was perfect. A challenge she was not equipped for in his mind. A way to underscore her perceived inadequacy. "Nurse Volkov," he said, the decision made. "He's yours. Let's see if your organizational skills extend to a patient who won't fit neatly into one of your boxes." He tossed the chart onto the counter in front of her. The plastic slapped against the formica with a sound of finality. Anya picked up the file. Her fingers traced the name on the label. Sergeant Thomas Miller, another soldier. This place was full of them, ghosts in various states of fading. She opened the chart, her eyes scanning the pages of medical history, a long and complicated story of a body breaking down. Sepsis, kidney failure, arrhythmias. The official notes painted a picture of systemic collapse. It was, as Dr. Evans had so callously put it, a mess. Brenda moved to stand beside her, looking at the chart over Anya's shoulder. "He's trying to set you up, you know?" she murmured, her voice low. "Miller's case is a hornet's nest. No clear answers, and Evans will blame you for any decline." "It's a patient, Brenda," Anya said, her focus already. Wires snaked from his body to the monitors, their screens painting his story in jagged green and yellow lines. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow, aided by a nasal cannula. Anya checked his lines, her hands gentle. She observed him, not as a collection of symptoms on a chart, but as a whole system. The slight cyanotic tinge to his nail beds, the specific coolness of his skin. It all pointed away from the official diagnosis of simple renal decline. She knew she had to report it. It was protocol. It was the right thing to do. She found Dr. Evans holding court with a group of medical residents, pontificating about a recent article he had published. She waited patiently until he acknowledged her with an irritated sigh. "What is it, nurse? Can't you see I'm in the middle of teaching?" "It's about Sergeant Miller, doctor," she began, keeping her voice steady, respectful. "I've noticed a pattern in his vitals. His hypotensive episodes are preceded by subtle desaturations several hours prior. It's not consistent with the presentation of renal failure alone. I believe it could be an underlying mitochondrial issue, perhaps triggered by the post-sepsis state. It's something she caught herself. She had almost said, seen before. It's a possibility we should consider." Dr. Evans stared at her. For a moment there was silence. Then he laughed, a loud braying sound that made the residents shift uncomfortably. "Mitochondrial issue?" he boomed, incredulous. "Based on what? Your feeling? Did you get your medical degree from a crystal ball, Nurse Volkov?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "I am the head of this department. I have degrees from Johns Hopkins and a fellowship at Mayo Clinic. You are a nurse who stocks cabinets. You will follow the established treatment plan for renal decline and sepsis aftermath. You will not, under any circumstances, entertain your wild, unsubstantiated fantasies. Is that clear?" His words were like stones, each one a calculated blow. Anya felt the familiar urge to shrink, to retreat into the shell of invisibility she had so carefully constructed. The old Anya, the quiet nurse, would have nodded, apologized, and walked away. But looking at the smug, arrogant face of Dr. Evans and thinking of the quiet, fading man in bed 7, something else stirred within her. A cold, hard defiance. She met his gaze. "The data suggests a different path, doctor," she said, her voice still quiet but now laced with a thread of something unyielding. "I would like it noted in the chart that I raised this concern." The request was a direct challenge to his authority. His face darkened. "Fine," he hissed. "Note it. Note your little theory. It will be a perfect piece of evidence for your disciplinary hearing when your incompetence leads to that man's inevitable decline. Now get out of my sight." Anya turned and walked away, her back straight. She had done what she had to do. She had raised the flag. But as she returned to Sergeant Miller's bedside, a profound sense of dread settled over her. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the flag had been ignored, and she knew that the storm was coming. The fragile, managed order of the ICU was about to break. Over the next few hours, Anya hovered near Sergeant Miller's room, her focus absolute. She performed her other duties, but her attention was a tether, connecting her to the man in bed 7. She watched the monitor, her eyes tracking the wavering lines of his life. She saw another dip in his O2 saturation, so small it barely registered as a blip. It was the harbinger, the whisper before the scream. She meticulously documented everything, her notes precise, factual, a clear and undeniable record. Each entry was a brick in a wall of evidence, though she feared it would only be read after the fact, like an epitaph. While charting, she found herself performing small, almost unconscious actions from her old life. She tapped her pen against the chart in a specific 3-beat rhythm, a habit from long-range patrols. When a metal tray clattered to the floor behind her, she didn't jump. Her body tensed into a low crouch for a split second before her conscious mind remembered where she was. Brenda noticed. She brought Anya a cup of coffee, her expression a mixture of concern and admiration. "You're wound tighter than a guitar string," she said softly. "I saw what he did back there. Evans is a paper tiger, Anya. All roar, but I've seen him freeze up when things go off script. You were right to stand your ground." "It won't matter if the patient pays the price for his ego," Anya replied, her gaze fixed on Miller's monitor. "You're a good nurse, Anya. Better than good," Brenda insisted. She leaned closer. "You move like a soldier. Seen a bit of that in my dad after he came back from his tours. The way you watch everything, like you're expecting trouble from every corner. You don't have to tell me anything, but just know, I see you." The simple words, "I see you," struck Anya with unexpected force. For 6 years, her entire existence had been predicated on not being seen. To be acknowledged felt both comforting and terrifying. It was a crack in her armor. As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Evans appeared at the entrance to the ICU, his face a mask of irritation. He had a stack of journals under his arm, and he made a show of stopping by Anya's station. "Still obsessing, Nurse Volkov?" he asked loudly, ensuring the nearby staff could hear. "I've just been reviewing the latest literature on post-sepsis renal failure. Fascinating stuff. Not a single mention of your pet mitochondrial fury. Perhaps you should spend less time staring at screens and more time reading actual science." He tapped a journal. "This is what competence looks like," he said, holding it up like a holy text. "Peer-reviewed, evidence-based medicine. Not guesswork from an over-caffeinated nurse." He was actively trying to humiliate her, to make an example of her. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on her shoulders. Anya felt the stares of her colleagues. In their eyes, she saw pity, second-hand embarrassment, and the quiet relief that they were not the target of his tirade. She simply nodded, her jaw tight, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. Her silence seemed to infuriate him more than any argument could have. "You are on thin ice," he warned, his voice a low hiss. "One more step out of line, one more deviation from my orders, and I will personally see to it that you are not just fired from this hospital, but that your nursing license is reviewed for gross insubordination." He turned and stalked off, leaving a wake of toxic silence behind him. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Anya knew he meant it. He had the power, the influence, and the vindictive nature to destroy her career. The career she had built to escape her past. The irony was a bitter pill. She had run from a world of violence and chaos, only to find herself in a different kind of war, a battle of ego and protocol, where the casualties were just as real. She looked back at Sergeant Miller, his chest rising and falling in a shallow, fragile rhythm. He was the battlefield, and the battle was about to begin. She was on her own, armed with nothing but a forbidden knowledge and the conviction that was about to cost her everything. The clock was ticking, and the signal flare she had sent up had been mistaken for smoke. The first alarm was a high, piercing shriek that cut through the monotonous hum of the ICU like a blade. Code Blue, Bed 7. Chaos erupted. Nurses and residents converged on Sergeant Miller's room. A crash cart was slammed against the doorframe in their haste. Voices overlapped, sharp and panicked. "He's in VFib. Get the pads on him. Starting compressions." Dr. Evans came running, his face flushed, a thin sheen of sweat on his brow. He pushed his way to the bedside, shouting orders. "Charge to 200, clear." The defibrillator whined and then thumped. Sergeant Miller's body arched off the bed, a grotesque involuntary spasm, before falling back. The monitor showed the same jagged, chaotic rhythm. Ventricular fibrillation. "No change, go again. Charge to 300, Evans commanded, his voice strained. Anya stood at the edge of the room, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She watched the scene unfold with a terrifying clarity. They were treating the symptom, the cardiac arrest, but not the cause. It was like trying to patch a bursting dam with duct tape. She saw the numbers on the secondary monitor, the ones no one else was paying attention to in the heat of the moment. His core temperature was plummeting. His blood gases were wildly acidic. It was exactly what she had feared. A total metabolic collapse. The cardiac arrest was just the final catastrophic system failure. "Clear," Evans yelled again. Another violent jolt, another failure. The VFib briefly converted to asystole, a flatline, before devolving back into chaos. "We're losing him," a young resident cried out, his face pale with terror. This was the moment, the breaking point. Dr. Evans, the man of peer-reviewed science and unshakable confidence, was staring at the flatline, his mind apparently wiped clean of all his textbook knowledge. The unscripted reality of a man dying in a way he did not understand had paralyzed him. He was a paper tiger who had seen his first real fire, and he was turning to ash. He looked at the monitor, then at the patient, then back at the monitor, his mouth slightly agape. He was lost. "Doctor, what's the next step?" a nurse asked, her voice trembling. Evans didn't answer. He just stood there, frozen, a statue of useless authority. In that sliver of frozen time, as the frantic energy in the room curdled into despair, Anya felt the world slow down. The panicked shouts, the blaring alarms, the frantic, inefficient movements, it all faded into a dull roar. A switch flipped in her mind. It was a feeling she knew intimately, a cold wave of absolute focus that washed away all fear, all doubt, all hesitation. The quiet, unassuming nurse receded. The ghost she had tried to bury for 6 years clawed its way to the surface. The part of her that was forged in the crucible of combat, the part that knew how to function when the world was ending, took control. She moved. Her first action was to shove past a stunned resident. Her second was to place a firm hand on Dr. Evans's shoulder and physically move him away from the bed. "Get out of my way," she said. The words were not a request, they were a command. Her voice was unrecognizable. The soft, deferential tone was gone, replaced by a low, hard-edged instrument of absolute authority. It was a voice that expected and received instant obedience. It cut through the panic in the room like a laser. Dr. Evans stumbled back, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. Everyone froze, turning to stare at her. They saw a different woman. Her posture was ramrod straight. Her eyes, which were usually downcast, were now blazing with a terrifying intensity. She was no longer hiding. "Brenda," she barked, not taking her eyes off Miller. I need a central line kit, the largest bore catheter you have, and 100 milligrams of dantrolene. Now. Brenda, after a split second of shock, nodded and moved, her trust in Anya overriding years of hospital hierarchy. You, Anya pointed to the pale resident, stop compressions, get me a blood gas sample from his femoral artery. You, she pointed to another nurse, run it to the lab yourself and tell them I want results in 90 seconds or I'm coming down there myself. The staff, accustomed to chaos but not to this kind of crystalline command, moved without question. They were soldiers now, and she was their commander. He's in malignant hyperthermia triggered by metabolic acidosis, she announced to the room, her voice clear and cold. His cells are burning themselves out. The defibrillator is useless until we fix the underlying chemistry. She worked with a speed and precision that was inhuman. While Brenda prepped the supplies, Anya tore open Miller's gown. Her hands moved over his neck, feeling for the landmarks of the subclavian vein. It was a high-risk procedure, usually done with ultrasound guidance by a senior physician. Anya didn't have time for that. She took the large bore needle and with a single fluid motion performed the subclavian stick. A perfect clean insertion. She threaded the line, her movements economical and brutally efficient. There was no hesitation, no wasted effort. This was muscle memory from a different life, from doing this same procedure in the back of a shuddering helicopter, in the dark, with blood on her gloves and the sounds of gunfire outside. Dantrolene, she commanded, holding out her hand. Brenda slapped the vial into her palm. Anya drew up the drug and pushed it into the new central line, a massive dose that went directly to the heart. Start a bicarbonate drip, wide open. We need to fight the acidosis. The resident returned with the blood gas syringe. Anya glanced at it, then at the monitor. He's still in VFib, but his temperature has stopped dropping. The dantrolene is working. She looked at the defibrillator. Charge to 360. She took the pads herself. Clear, she yelled. The command was a physical force. Everyone instinctively recoiled from the bed. She pressed the buttons. Miller's body convulsed one last time, and then, on the monitor, the jagged, chaotic scroll of VFib vanished. It was replaced by a single beautiful rhythmic peak and valley, a normal sinus rhythm. A stunned silence descended upon the room. The only sound was the steady, reassuring beep of the heart monitor, a sound that just moments ago had seemed an impossible dream. They had pulled him back from the very edge of the abyss. No, she had. The team stood breathless, staring at Anya. They looked at the stabilized patient, the impossibly placed central line, the empty vials of medication, and then back at this quiet nurse who had transformed into a whirlwind of life-saving competence. Her sleeve had been pushed high up her arm during the procedure, revealing the tattoo in its entirety. On her forearm, clear as day, were 2 green feet inked into her skin, surrounded by a serpent and topped with the image of a maroon beret. It was the iconic symbol of an Air Force pararescueman, APJ, the elite combat medics of the Special Operations world. It was at that exact moment that the door to the room swished open. A small group of people stood there, drawn by the earlier commotion. In the lead was a tall, distinguished man in a Navy commander's dress uniform, his chest adorned with ribbons. He was being given a tour of the VA hospital he had helped fund. His eyes took in the scene. The exhausted medical team, the stabilized patient, the lingering smell of ozone from the defibrillator. Then his gaze fell on Anya. He saw her posture, the cold fire still burning in her eyes and the tattoo on her arm. His own posture, already military straight, snapped to an even more rigid form. He stood ramrod straight, his heels clicking together on the linoleum. He raised his hand in a sharp, formal salute. The entire room, including a dumbfounded Dr. Evans, watched as the decorated Navy commander stood at perfect, formal attention, his eyes locked on the unassuming nurse. His voice, when he spoke, was filled with a deep, profound reverence that echoed in the silent room. "Sergeant Volkov," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "My God, we thought you were dead." The name hung in the air, Sergeant Volkov, not Nurse Volkov. Sergeant. The title, spoken with such deference by a high-ranking officer, recontextualized everything. The skill, the command, the tattoo. It all snapped into place. Dr. Evans stared, his face a canvas of dawning, horrified comprehension. The woman he had belittled, the nurse he had threatened and mocked, was a war hero. A legend from the shadowy world of special operations, hiding in plain sight. And he had called her incompetent. The adrenaline that had flooded Anya's system, the cold, hard focus of the PJ, began to recede. It left a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed 6 years of suppressed trauma. The sounds of the ICU faded and were replaced by the phantom roar of a Black Hawk helicopter. The smell of antiseptic became the smell of sand and cordite. Her hands, which had been so steady just moments before, began to tremble. She looked down at Sergeant Miller, safe for now, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She had done it. She had saved him. But the cost was the shattering of the fragile piece she had built for herself. The ghost was out of the bottle, and she didn't know how to put it back. Her knees felt weak, the room tilted slightly. Brenda was at her side in an instant, a steadying hand on her arm. "I've got you," she murmured, her voice a lifeline in the sudden storm inside Anya's head. "Breathe, just breathe. You did it." Commander Thorne lowered his salute and took a step forward, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and concern, never leaving Anya's face. "Anya," he said, his voice softer now. "It's me, Commander Thorne. I was the ground force commander in the Zangali Valley. You pulled 3 of my SEALs out of that ambush." Anya looked at him, her eyes struggling to connect the decorated officer in front of her with the desperate voice she remembered screaming coordinates over a crackling radio. Zangali. The name was a scar on her memory. It was the mission that had broken her. The one where she had saved 3 men but lost her partner. "Thorne," she whispered, the name a ghost on her lips. "We heard your bird went down on Exfil," he continued, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Your name was on the wall. We mourned you." "I wasn't on the bird," she said, her voice hollow. "I gave my seat to a wounded local kid. I walked out." The memory was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. She had walked for 3 days, alone, with the ghosts of the dead for company. Dr. Evans, who had been standing by the door like a man turned to stone, finally seemed to process the magnitude of his failure. It wasn't just that he had been wrong about a diagnosis. It wasn't just that a nurse had shown him up. He had actively tried to silence and punish a decorated combat medic who was trying to save a fellow veteran's life. He had stood on his credentials and his ego while a true hero, operating on instinct honed in the worst places on earth, was begging to be heard. The shame was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs, buckling his knees. He leaned against the wall, his face ashen. Later that day, after Anya had been relieved from her shift and given a mandatory rest period, she was called to the hospital administrator's office. She walked in, expecting a reprimand, perhaps even her termination, for her gross insubordination. Dr. Evans's threat still echoed in her ears. Instead, she found Commander Thorne and the hospital director, a stern-faced woman named Miss Albright, waiting for her. Dr. Evans was there too, standing in the corner, his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked smaller, diminished, his expensive suit now looking like a cheap costume. "Miss Volkov," Miss Albright began, her tone formal but not unkind. "Commander Thorne has illuminated us as to the full scope of your background." She gestured to a file on her desk. It was Anya's military service record, which Thorne had apparently expedited from the Pentagon. Air Force Cross, 2 Silver Stars, multiple commendations for valor. The records refer to you as one of the most effective combat medics of your generation. Anya said nothing. Those medals were just pieces of metal in a box in her closet, collecting dust along with a folded flag. Miss Albright continued. "Dr. Evans has also provided a full, written confession of his conduct today and in the preceding weeks. He has tendered his resignation as head of the department." At this, Dr. Evans flinched. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting Anya's. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound, gut-wrenching humility. "There's no excuse for what I did," he said, his voice raspy. "My pride, my ego. I almost killed that man. You were right, and I was too arrogant to listen. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The apology was not for the administrators. It was for her, and it was raw and real. Anya looked at the broken man in the corner. She felt no triumph, no vindication, only a deep, weary sadness for the waste of it all. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. "We are not accepting his resignation," Miss Albright stated, surprising everyone. "Instead, he will be on probationary review and will be required to attend remedial training. Training which, Ms. Volkov, we would like you to design and lead." Anya stared at her. "What?" "Commander Thorne has made it clear that you possess a unique and invaluable skill set," Albright explained. "A practical diagnostic intuition that our residents and, evidently, some of our senior staff are sorely lacking. We want to create a new position for you, Director of Emergency Response Training. You would be responsible for running crisis simulations, teaching advanced field expedient procedures, and training our medical teams to think beyond the textbook, to see the patient, not just the chart." It was an offer to integrate her two lives, to take the ghost of Sergeant Volkov, the PJ, and give her a home alongside Nurse Anya, the caregiver. It was a chance to use her past not as something to run from, but as a tool to build a better future. To teach others the hard-won lessons of the Zangali Valley without them having to pay the same price she had. "Your skills don't belong in the shadows, Anya," Commander Thorne said gently. "They belong in the light, where they can save more lives." A few days later, Anya walked into Sergeant Miller's room. He was sitting up in a chair, looking weak but lucid. The forest of IV poles and monitors around him had thinned considerably. He looked up as she entered, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. "You're the one," he said, his voice rough. "They told me what you did. You saved my life." Anya pulled up a chair and sat down. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to hide. She had rolled up the sleeves of her uniform, and the green feet tattoo was plainly visible. "I was just doing my job, Sergeant," she said. He looked at her arm, at the tattoo. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "That's no nurse's tattoo," he said knowingly. "My son was Army Rangers. I've seen the ink the special ops guys wear. You've been there. You've seen the elephant." "I have," she admitted, the words feeling less heavy than they used to. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two soldiers in a quiet room, bound by an unspoken understanding. They didn't need to talk about the horrors, they both knew. The shared experience was a bridge between them. "Thank you," Miller said finally, his eyes shining with gratitude, "for listening when no one else would." In that moment, Anya felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. Saving a life in the chaos of battle was a duty, a violent, adrenaline-fueled act of survival. But this quiet moment of connection with the man she had pulled back from the brink, felt different. It felt like healing. It was not just his survival, but a piece of her own. She was no longer just the ghost of a fallen hero, nor was she just a timid nurse hiding from her past. She was both. She was whole. The following Monday, the ICU had a different feel. The air was still thick with the smell of antiseptic, the monitors still kept their rhythmic time, but the oppressive tension had eased. Dr. Evans moved through the ward with a newfound quietness, his questions to the nurses genuine, his ears open. He listened. Anya stood at the front of a conference room filled with the hospital's newest residents. She wore her scrubs, sleeves rolled up. On the whiteboard behind her, she had drawn a diagram of a human torso, highlighting unconventional points for emergency intervention. Her voice was calm, steady, and confident. There was no trace of the timid woman who stocked supply cabinets. "The first rule of a crisis is this," she said, her eyes meeting those of each young doctor in the room. "The patient is not the chart. The monitors are not the patient. They are data points. Your job is to see the person, to understand the system as a whole, and to listen to the story the body is telling you, even when it's just a whisper." She picked up a marker. "Forget protocol for a moment. Forget the textbook. Today I'm going to teach you how to save a life when everything has gone wrong." A new chapter had begun. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was a life she had earned. It was a life where her past was not a liability to be hidden, but her greatest strength. True respect, she had learned, wasn't found in titles or credentials printed on a piece of paper. It was forged in the crucible of action. It was earned in the quiet moments of competence when no one was watching, and in the loud moments of crisis when everyone was. Survival was not the same as healing. Healing was the moment you stopped running from who you were and finally allowed yourself to be seen, scars and all. The bravest act, she now understood, was not walking out of a war zone alone. It was showing up for the rest of your life as your whole self.